They recently, the Jesuit branch of the Catholic Church, the science branch, amended their policy on life beyond the world. And the language was very interesting. They said, we believe it is not counter to Catholic doctrine for there to be life beyond this world. Of course, as a geologist, I believe in evolution for many forms of life. I've seen it in the fossil record, plants, animals, insects, but that theory, Darwin's theory, breaks down when it comes to humans. Something happened to us 200,000 years ago, and we can see it. And Russian scientists were the first that began to look at the human body from an IT perspective. They started looking at cells as circuits.
We are more than we are led to believe, for sure.
Yeah.
And that we have a future that is continually evolving, but that we have choices along the way in order to align to that reality or to stick with a reality that's more base.
Unless we change the trajectory that we're on right now, we are the last generation of pure humans that the world will ever know.
Gregg Braden, what an honor it is to have you here on the Think Tank. I've been a fan of yours for a long time now. I'd say probably the better part of 15 years. And I remember when you had a long mullet in the back of your head, so I actually remember those days. And it's such a pleasure to have you here. You're a scientist, but also a mystic. And I see you as someone who is a polymath also, and sees the world from number and gematria all the way through to geology and, crustal displacement and all kinds of things like that, like our mutual friends like Randall Carlson.
Yeah.
And I really see you as an all-around, like a Neoplatonic kind of character in this day and age that brings to us a different way to look at life and what this experience of life is. So what a pleasure it is to have you here with me today.
Robert, thank you. Thank you for seeing me that way. And thank you for the memory of my mullet.
Yes.
And
that was a video of cymatics that you were basically showing. And it was one of the most profound videos that I ever watched at that stage in my awakening process. And you were showing how, I think it was how a perfect cube was being made inside of cymatics with water. And I was like blown away. And then at that moment, I was a pharma CEO at the time. I was a big pharma CEO. And I immediately was convinced that the future of medicine was in sound.
Okay, that video, interestingly, was the first video that Gaia, at that time, the company was called Gaia. I was their first video project, and that was filmed in the Gaia studios in an old building where they used to be in. So that dates it pretty well. This is the first time you and I have worked together, but I follow your work, Robert, and you and I met briefly at the Gaia conference, in last year, 2024. And I just want to tell you how much I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. This is unscripted. We have no idea where this is going to go, and that's what makes it really exciting.
Exactly right. Well, I'd really like to start off with your work in Gematria, because I found your presentation super fascinating, related to DNA, and it paralleled a lot of my own type of discovery work, not necessarily related to Gematria, but related specifically to a counting system within DNA that I found to be fascinating and very much consistent with what you had found it from a totally different vector.
Yeah, the idea, first of all, number. I've been fascinated by numbers since I was very, very young. I knew at 5 years old I was going to be a scientist. I didn't know exactly what kind of scientist, and numbers were the foundation of all the sciences. I think many of your viewers probably know I worked in the corporations during the Cold War behind the scenes by day as a senior computer systems designer for that time. The company was called Martin Marietta Defense Systems by day, but nights and weekends I was deep into the texts that have been left for us, the text and the clues that have been left for us by those who have come before us. And ultimately, I believe that if we know where to look and we know how to look, that those who've come before us left the clues to end the suffering, to end the kinds of wars and the atrocities that we've all seen the 20th and now early 21st centuries. And that was what led me on a journey, Robert, to understand what did our ancestors know that we've forgotten? What did they know that we're only beginning to understand for the first time? And it all came back to number. And I think one of the breakthrough realizations for me was when I found that without exception, every system of communication from our past always had a numeric equivalent to, and I'm saying it even goes beyond alphabets. We have alphabets, we have other communication systems. Cuneiform, for example, is not clearly an alphabet per se, is a writing system, and even cuneiform. Every cuneiform symbol has a number associated with that symbol. The numbers are mysterious. No one knows precisely where they came from. They never change. So while the meanings of the words can change over time, the numbers never change. So when we really want to get to the bottom of what a text is telling us, numbers is the place to go. Now, where that led me, interestingly, it was 1995. It was actually the same year that video in Gaia was made. That was made in 95. 95, Michael Drosnin released a New York Times bestselling book about the relationship between the numbers in the Old Testament, the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And it was based on a statistical science paper from the Hebrew University by a man named Elihu Rips.
Hi, I'm Robert Edward Grant. I invite you to explore my transformative books, Philomath and Polymath, each designed to expand your understanding of the world and ourselves. In Philomath, which means lover of learning, discover how mathematics weaves together physics, music, and prime number theory, revealing the universe's interconnected nature. It's more than a book, it's an enlightening voyage. Polymath builds on Philomath's insights, exploring the genius of thinkers like Pythagoras and Da Vinci, who used geometry to revolutionize science, art, and governance. Rediscover the polymathic roots that sparked past ages of enlightenment. Join me on this journey as well. Visit robertedwardgrant.com to get your copies today. Let's foster a new era of enlightenment and collaboration for a brighter future.
What he found was that there are literally layers of codes of information underlying the outer text that we read as words.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And for the first time, they had computers that were able to create the search algorithms and what are called ELS, equidistant letter spacing algorithms. And that led me on a journey. I said, well, if this is true, where else is it true? Well, it was also during, in the 1980s, late 80s, when for the first time the human genome was available as a file that the average person could look at on a computer. Now, not everybody had computers like we do today. So I was using Martin Marietta computers during the lunch break, only during the lunch break. But we had access through DARPA, who created originally the internet with CERN, and we had the opportunity to look at the genome. And man, I'll tell you, it was a mind blower. The first time I saw the human genome digitally on a screen, my expertise in software development was in an area called pattern recognition software. And the first time I looked at that genome, I said, man, this is not random. There are patterns here and meaningful patterns. And that led me on a journey to understand the relationship between number of the alphabets and the numbers that underlie the stuff we're made of, that underlie the elements of the DNA that we're made of. And the outcome of that, I think, was part of the presentation that you saw at Gaia, is that there literally are encoded messages in the human genome that you read like you read the letters on the pages of a book. When we find the equivalent between the numbers that represent the elements, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, and the numbers that represent the ancient alphabets. And I think what was so powerful for me at the time, Robert, was when we look at linguistics, the core alphabets are considered to be cuneiform, Sanskrit, Arabic, and Hebrew. And as different as they are from one another, the message encoded into our DNA reads exactly the same in each of those four core alphabets. In other words, it's such a universal message. And to me, that is also a message of hope and peace. When we think our differences are so great that we have to hurt one another to solve our problems, we need look no further than the DNA in the nucleus of the 50 trillion cells in every one of the 8+ billion people on the planet. The message is the same. And if our viewers have not seen it, the message, when we equate the letters of the ancient alphabets with the atomic mass of the elements that make our bodies, and we equate those numbers, they become interchangeable. And so when we put the letters in place of those elements, the message literally reads, and this isn't a metaphor and it's not a channeled message. It literally reads the words God eternal within the body. And the word God is the word that is spelled in those ancient texts. It doesn't say, where God comes from. Doesn't say
Yahweh.
how it happened. Well, it's abbreviation of Yahweh. It's YH.
YH. Mm-hmm.
Which is, if you read further in the original text.
Yod-Hey, I guess.
Well, if you read in the Hebrew text of Exodus, where Moses is receiving that code, if we're to believe that process happened historically the way that it's described, if you read further down, he actually asked for clarification in terms of, he said, who are you? Or who am I talking to? And the name given was Yah. Yah is actually was the personal name of, this is where it gets really interesting. Yah was the personal name of the being that revealed that text. However, previously, we're told that we are the product of Elohim, which is very controversial, because when the translators translated the biblical text into what we call the King James Version, for example, or others, they took the word Elohim and they wrote it as the word God. Well, Elohim is a plural, which means it was more than one being, and there's a lot of controversy around this. So it appears that Moses received that Gematria message, and I'll describe that in a moment, from one of the Elohim, one of the plural gods that are responsible for our existence. And the way that the scholars now, and I've worked with some of the Hebrew scholars who have actually when the Bible code, the original Eli Rips just passed recently, and I'm in contact. There were three rabbis. I'm in contact with the other two, and there's a lot of information in the original Hebrew text that is lost in the translation. But it appears, and this comes back to number, that the way Moses received that information, it wasn't on two big granite slabs like Charlton Heston coming down, the mountain. That it was a continuous string of numbers, numeric information with no punctuation, and it wasn't on massive slabs. It was on a relatively small crystalline material that is not known in this world. And that is part of what is believed to be the mystery in the Ark. When we find there are many Ark of the Covenants in terms of copies. When we find, I think we already found it when it is actually revealed, the original Ark. I think this what we'll find is that the Torah is actually revealed in relatively held in the palm of the hand, a small crystalline substance in number. Those numbers, when they are converted to their alpha equivalent, become what we read as the Torah.
And what do you believe is that crystalline substance?
I don't know. I don't know for sure. It was given, if we're to believe the story as it's told in our biblical text. It was given to Moses. It could have been synthetic substance. It could be a natural material that doesn't occur on Earth, but it wasn't like something he just picked up out of the Sinai Desert. I led groups into Egypt for 15 years, and usually a couple of times a year. And our trip always included the opportunity to go to Sinai, both to the monastery as well as to climb the mountain in the place where it is believed that this happened. And there's nothing there. I mean, it's not like there's a lot of loose stones lying around. There's no plants, there's no water. It's just you and the sky and the earth and God. And that substance, I think, when we actually, that will be part of disclosure. It all ties into the disclosure process in terms of who we are, where it is that we've come from, who are the Elohim. And now when you open the door to that question, you're talking about the Gilgamesh discovery of the Gilgamesh tomb. You're talking about all the Mesopotamian texts, Akkadian, Sumerian, Babylonian. You're talking about, much more than Area 51 and some craft and a hangar there. So I think that's one of the reasons for the delay in the disclosure. It's actually happening. I don't think anyone, most people, I don't think anybody's going to be surprised if our government says, hey, we've got a craft from another world, because it is almost common knowledge. I don't think anyone's going to be surprised if they see a small 3.5 or 4 foot tall, gray being, because they've been portrayed for so long in the media. But when it comes to what that means to us and our origins and who we are, where we come from, I think that is really, that's what's holding this whole thing up. The church is really pushing back on the disclosure of that kind of information.
So when you say the church, what church is that?
Well, the Catholic Church is really pushing back. Okay. They recently, the Jesuit branch of the Catholic Church, the science branch, amended their policy on life beyond the world. And the languaging, I didn't know we were going to have this conversation, so I'm going to do this from memory, but the languaging was very interesting. They said, we believe it is not counter to Catholic doctrine for there to be life beyond this world. So they open the door to accepting it if the need comes. Prior to that, in other words, is the God of the earth the God of all the universe, or is there life, other life that may have? Is it subject to the same God? And it's going to open up the door to a lot of really interesting questions.
Have you ever been to the Vatican Library?
I have been once to the library. My understanding is it's much bigger probably than what I was allowed to see. So I have not seen it in its entirety. I was seeing what we were allowed to see, publicly. And I think that will have to be part of disclosure, because many of the artifacts that we're talking about that link us to civilizations beyond this world are ancient, and those have been held in the Vatican archives, as well as the texts. For years I've done a very deep dive into the Gnostic texts and that were disavowed by the early councils of the church. There was one in the Council of Nicaea many people have heard about. There was another council, the Council of Carthage, and Carthage is the one that disavowed some of the most dangerous texts, such as the Gospel, the first and second Gospel of John, where John.
What was the date? I'm not familiar with it. I know the Nicene Creed and the Council of Nicaea very well.
Yeah, it was in the 4th century as well, but it was later in the 4th century. And I mention that because most people aren't familiar with that. They think there was only one council. There were multiple councils, and the Council of Carthage really, I think, was the nail that sealed the narrative that we have today, because there were multiple documents, and I'm not saying every one of these is absolutely true, but the Gospel of John, for example, is fascinating because it is written said to be written by John, who was the apostle. He received the gospel after the crucifixion from the resurrected Jesus, or Yeshua. Jesus is what it is in the translation, but it's Yeshua. So he received that, and it begins with the history of the universe, very similar to the book of Enoch. And it begins with the history of humankind and how humankind was created. And it essentially says we are a hybrid species. We are the flesh and the bone of this world imbued with an essence that gives us godlike powers that were sealed and kept from us. And I think this is really important because we're now in modern world. You say, well, these are old stories. In the modern world, we're at this pivotal point in the transhuman movement where we're being asked in a single generation to turn our biology over to technology, to relinquish our biology to AI, computer chips in the brain, chemicals in the blood, RFID chips under the skin, and more. And once we do that, what happens is our natural biology begins to atrophy, and we lose the very essence of our humanness, including the dormant potentials that open the door to these extraordinary abilities that we're only beginning to understand. So if you are to believe the Gnostic texts, it's a big story, probably more than I can do justice to here, but essentially what they say, Robert, is that we are lost, is that we are angels who have forgotten that they are angels. The Essenes, right. The Essenes actually say the only difference between the angels in the heavens and the angels that walk the earth is that the angels in the heavens remember that they're angels. The Gnostic texts say that when the rebellion happened in another world long before we got here, that our essence was deceived and brought to this world and trapped in this world in the sensual physicality of our bodies. And it's through those dormant potentials that we have the opportunity to redeem ourselves and return to our true home. If we give our bodies away to technology, we lose the ability to return to our true home. We are captive in this world forever, according to those Gnostic texts. These are the texts that were disavowed in the Carthage Council, and among the most heretical is the Gospel of Philip. For that reason and a lot of other reasons. So it all ties.
This is super.
Well, it sounds
super fascinating.
Well, we tend to think of these, as a scientist, I was trained to think of things compartmentalized. And Robert, the hardest thing for me was to break that programming. And I didn't even realize how deeply the programming ran until I began looking for the code within the human DNA. And the only way, if I was only a geneticist, I would never find it because I'd be looking only at DNA. And if I was only a linguist studying ancient cultures, I would never find it. If I was only a chemist looking at the stuff we're made of on the periodic table, I'd never find it. You've got to cross those traditional boundaries. And man, it sounds simple now, but it's a hard thing to break that programming. And I lost all credibility as a scientist, when I began to do that. And I personally, I had a little bit of a struggle. I went through divorce, changed. I left a job thinking I was going to a new calling. In the process of doing that, lost a family, lost a wife, lost friends, and there's a point where you have to say, what is the price that you're willing to pay? And is it possible to follow your passion with kindness and hurting other people as little as possible? And I think for me, I still look for that answer, but I think that the only way we can answer that is to be honest, truthful, factual, and kind, and say, this is my calling. This is what makes my soul sing. My last day on earth, if I left this world and I didn't share what it is that I have found here, would I feel complete within myself? And if the answer is no, then you know where that path is leading. And for other people, it's not their path. So it was hard, and it was worth it to me. And it is that passion, I think, that allowed me to cross those traditional boundaries, lose my reputation in the scientific community. I don't publish white papers in the journal Nature. I could, but I don't do that now, because I think we're at a point where it's important to take the information directly to our community, because the timeline is so brief. We're in it. We're in this shift. The only way out of it is to go through it. And if you wait 8 or 10 years for a peer-reviewed paper to catch up with you, it's too late. So
I could not agree with you more. And you've definitely been an inspiration in that for me, because I also came from a very more traditional background. I was a big pharma CEO, and I had to basically give up a lot that also led to some of the similar life changes that you experienced as well, making this transition. But I'm very happy that I did. And I don't think there could have been any other way for me now, because it's the journey towards my authentic self, I guess. And more than anything else, I do believe that that's really probably the fundamental message of life. But this message that was in the DNA, let's go back to that just for a moment. What did it say to you? I mean, what was the big aha for you when you found that the message was, and you could repeat it again, it was God is the eternal.
So the message. So just the context. It took me almost 15 years to figure this out. And the reason was I had to break those traditional barriers, cross those barriers. I knew that when it comes to the Gematria, there was one letter and one number correspondence, no problem there. Now you look at the periodic table, and we're made primarily of hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon. Robert, there are, as you know, there's a whole lot of numbers that can describe hydrogen. You've got atomic weight, atomic mass, valence, all kinds of things.
Sure.
And we didn't have computers on the desktop like we do today. So this was all done by hand. And at night, I would work. Most of my work happens between 11 at night and 3 in the morning. I'm a night person. And I would have a legal...
Me too, by the way.
Well, that's what my books are written. I would have a legal pad, and I was just going through by hand. There were no reference books for what I was doing, so I had to create my own reference books. And I still have handwritten notebooks of all the things. And it was about 2:30 in the morning, and I was literally sitting in my living room with my back against the couch. I wasn't even in the office, and I was on a table at 2:30 in the morning when that first message came through. And it literally came through the words, God, eternal within the body. And I thought, I won't even tell you what I actually said, but first thing I did, I actually called a statistician friend of mine, and I said, man, is this a fluke? Is this, what are the possibilities? And he ran some numbers, 0.00043%, or 1 in 256,000 and something, that it was a fluke. So it appears to be intentional. And
I thought you were going to say 0.00432, which would have been really funny, because that is actually Euler to the power of pi.
Wow. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that. Well, I had them run the numbers, and then once he did that, I have to tell you, honestly, I felt differently about myself. And it could have been because it was 2:30 in the morning and I was I was pretty toasted. But when I began to realize what was actually what I was seeing, it was saying, so I think of it like this. I'm also an artist and a musician in my spare time. And what I know is, for every artist, every musician, when you create something that you're proud of, when you're finished, the last thing you do is you put your mark on it. You sign that because you are proud of it. And of course, as a geologist, I believe in evolution for many forms of life. I've seen it in the fossil record, plants, animals, insects. But that theory, Darwin's theory, breaks down when it comes to humans. Something happened to us 200,000 years ago, and we can see it in the genetic record of the mutations that happened exactly at that time that cannot happen in nature. They cannot happen under natural conditions. So I would hope if who or whatever is responsible for our existence was proud of what was created, that they would have left a signature or they would have left a mark in the essence of our DNA, and that when we achieve a level of consciousness where we know where to look, we know how to look, and we have the technology that allows us to look, that we would see that message. So when I read, that's my personal belief system. So when I read the words God eternal within the body in the genetic sequence that I had, and it was a computer printout of a genetic sequence, to me, I felt differently about myself. Even though I knew that I'm not the product of lucky biology and random mutations, seeing it pop out in the DNA like that. And then I tried it again and again and again, different segments of DNA. And what it looks like, Robert, the DNA is coded in layers, just like a book has a preface and, a chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. And this part of the DNA, this is the top layer. It literally is the introduction to what comes next. So who are we? We're God eternal within the body. And
what was the number string that was equivalent to? Do you remember?
Well, it was when we convert. So I'll step back. The instructions that taught me how to do this, I derived from a 3,000-year-old text called the Sefer Yetzirah, which is a mysterious text. It's only about 1,000 lines long. It's only been translated once into English by a man who passed not long ago. His name was Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, and what a brilliant brother. And it is so mysterious that many rabbis won't even teach. They'll teach the Midrash and they'll teach the Zohar, but when it comes to the Sefer Yetzirah, it's so mysterious they don't even teach it. And I said, man, there's a book that's so mysterious they don't want to teach. I
got to read that one.
Yeah, bring it on. So I procured a copy back in the 90s, and it's not an easy read, and it is all about Gematria. And following those instructions, I said, what if I equate these instructions that are 3,000 years old with the best science of the modern world? And that told me what order and how to go about making those connections. So when we treat the periodic table with the rules of Gematria and we treat the ancient alphabets with the rules of the periodic table, it breaks down to the numeric sequence 1563. And 1563, when we link that then to the Hebrew alphabet, that's where those letters come from. Now, the Y is actually the letter 10 in the Hebrew alphabet, but Gematria says, there's so many moving parts of this. Let me just step back. Gematria is a science because it was defined by 32 rabbinical rules that were laid down in the 2nd century. Numerology is a loose subset that is not a science because it doesn't conform to the rules. So this is not numerology, it is Gematria. And there are very specific rules in Gematria. And one of those rules says that a number can be reduced to what is called a Pythagorean number or an angelic number between 0 and 9. When we apply that to the periodic table, and we apply that to the ancient alphabet. So the Y in the Hebrew Gematria is a 10, 1 plus 0 is 1. So that becomes the 1, 5, 6, 5. And, we spell this out pretty clear. I have a new book called Pure Human. It is pushing back on the transhuman movement, and chapter 2 describes the whole process that we're talking about right now. For anybody that wants to follow that process, it literally is, anybody can do it. You can do it on a napkin at your family holiday gathering and impress your friends and neighbors if you want. But what it means, the meaning, And the implications are so profound, Robert. And it changed my life at that time and led me to even further pursue. I mean, there were other facets of my exploration. The Shroud of Turin, for example, is that an authentic shroud of a man who was described 2,000 years ago of Jesus, of being crucified. I was gifted in 1996 63 of the original slides from the photographer that documented the examination, the first examination of that shroud, and all the scientific categories. What it says, there's nothing in the shroud that prevents it from being the burial shroud of Jesus. The age, there is DNA, there is blood, it's AB positive. The man we know was about 5'7". He weighed 178 pounds. I mean, there's all kinds of information we can get from this. So when I'm reading God eternal within the body and then putting that in the context, not a religious context, but again, this is a Gnostic, from the Gnostic. Gnostic means gnosis, it means knowing. As we begin to have a deeper knowing of who we are, not from a religious perspective, historically, there was a man named Jesus, and according to the Gnostic text, he originated in a realm beyond the heaven of the Old Testament. That was the heresy in the book, the Gospel of John. Jesus' father, according to the Gnostics, his father was not the father in the Old Testament. His father was a greater, a higher principle, a deeper truth, a pure light is the way it's described. And finding a message in our DNA that is the same message that we find in the Shroud of Turin. So now you begin to make those links about who we are and what our potential is. Then the biblical texts say there's a time lock on human life based on the telomeres. Our time lock is 120 years. That is only determined by the number of times the cell can divide, which is directly linked to telomeres. Not just the number, but it's the health of the telomeres and the quality of the telomeres. Why the Gnostic texts talk about why that time lock was given. Not all of the Elohim agreed with it. Some of them wanted us to be full-on God-like beings. Others wanted us to have limited powers. Then you start getting into move away from the religious texts and you look at just historic documents from Mesopotamia. You look at the Babylonian creation story and the Sumerian texts. They're telling a very similar story without the religion. And in place of Elohim, they have words like Anunnaki and the biblical texts of Nephilim. So different stories, essentially with the same theme, that we're not from around here. We are a hybrid form of life given the potential of extraordinary abilities when we accept the responsibility that comes with having those abilities. And it's kind of it's a chicken and an egg kind of thing. As we accept and become, the word that they use is our divine potential. As we accept and embrace that in our lives, the acceptance is chemically what opens those potentials in our lives and in our bodies. And then we begin to age differently. We begin to metabolize differently. We begin to think differently. We intuit differently. And all of these.
Do you think that's what's happening now?
I do. I think that's exactly what's happening. I think it's happening to some people. There are some who are resisting, but I think the conditions of the world, and this is where the ancient Civ comes in, because as a geologist, what I can tell you is on a cyclic basis, beginning in the center of our universe, there is a volley of information in the form of cosmic rays that appear every 12 to 13,000 years. And that volley of information perturbates disturbs the core of our planet and sends us into shifts that force us to change the way we think and the way we live. So we've got a cosmological clock, and this is what I'm going to talk about it in Gaia, by the way, in August, Ancient Civ. We've got a cosmic clock driving geophysical processes under our feet that directly linked to the, I hesitate to use the word, but it's to the consciousness and the biology. They're intimately linked together. So we have a lot of help. The bottom line is we have a lot of help, and we're all at the precipice of a doorway that's opening in front of us. And whether we choose to accept our potential and step through that doorway is a personal choice. And this is where the suffering comes from. A lot of people resisting. We resist our power. That is where the suffering comes from.
Interesting. So, I did some analysis myself on DNA and on the periodic table of elements, and I came at it from a totally different perspective, but came away with a similar conclusion, I would say. And the way I looked at it was, I thought, what would be nature's counting system? And I thought immediately, well, it should be number of protons or number of electrons, right? Especially when we're talking about stable elements, and you have an equal number in that situation. And so, especially with all that makes up, the elements that make up the DNA, which is, predominantly just hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen, and sulfur. And basically, as I started looking at this, I started thinking, okay, well, if I take all of this and take the approach of a digital root in mathematics, which is what you actually just referenced when you talked about numbers between 0 and 9, and then I applied that to adding up all of the number of protons. When you combine all of them in the adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine pairings, what I found was that in all cases, they add up to a digital root that comes out to 9, which was fascinating because we see this with prime number theory as well. And prime numbers will always have reciprocal values. So 1 over the prime number, if it's larger than the number 7 and all the way out into the number series, will always have reciprocal values that add up to a period value, a reciprocal period or periodicity, which will always add up to a sum of 9 as well. And so I found that kind of fascinating. And then what I found was that when you have the adenine thymine pairing, and 9 could be synonymous with 0 because 9 takes the position of 0 as well, as you likely know. When you replace thymine with uracil, then all of a sudden it creates an offset of ones. So now you have ones and zeros.
Yep.
And it basically is acting like a binary code that then is determining, with the combination of those things, it determines all protein synthesis. And then what type of proteins, what type of codon pairings you're going to have, and then that extends to amino acids, and then from amino acids off to protein synthesis. And I was like, wow, this is clearly something that has been deliberately created. And when I go back to the fine structure constant, which I know you're probably very well familiar with, which is the 137 and 1 over 137, and the sarcophagus fits in the king's chamber 137 times, which is always something interesting to me. But I also noticed that the Hebrew word for God, Yahweh, Yod-He Vav-He, could also be seen, and I look at geometry as resonant shapes. So every shape has a meaning and has a certain resonance, right? Just like looking at your wall behind you with all the cool, geometric patterns based on triangles and right triangles, that even Yod-He Vav-He has a certain shape resonance associated with it as well. And I thought, well, what other mathematical notation would look like this? And of course, it's pi to the 7th power on the right side and pi times 7 on the left side. And because the hey looks like pi, and the yod looks like a 7, but a small 7, like a 7th power, and vav looks like 7, but a normal 7. And lo and behold, shock of shocks, when you take pi times 7 and divide it by pi to the 7th power, that reduces down to 1 over 137.
Wow. I don't know this, but you're the mathematician. That's why you would know this. I and those relationships. Wow. I'm not surprised, but I'm not aware of this relationship that you're talking about right now.
Yeah, and it seems ridiculous because you would think, how does, this Hebrew alphabet have anything to do with, what we use for pi and 7? But what I see is somehow there's some connection to consciousness.
Well, okay, this is it. And this is where it gets really interesting, because during the Cold War, the governments were at war, but scientists were still cooperating. It was a very civilized kind of a war. And Russian scientists were the first that began to look at the human body from an IT perspective. They started looking at cells as circuits, and they were looking at mitochondria as capacitors and resistors and transistors. And that has led to a very, very different way of thinking about the human body. In the journal Soft Computing, Proceedings from the Conference of Soft Computing, they literally stated that human DNA is a fractal antenna. So what that means is the DNA, an antenna tunes to a signal, fractal antenna tunes to many signals across a broad spectrum of information. So mathematically, what we're talking about is the ability to, because we can consciously change the morphology of our DNA. We can consciously, thought, feeling, emotion, belief, breath, epigenetic triggers change the morphology. We're changing what our fractal antenna is accessing. And that is the link to consciousness right there. I think that's what we're talking about.
It definitely feels like that. And so it started to make me think, okay, maybe this whole universe is something more related to this consciousness that connects everything. And for example, I spent a lot of time also working with my friend and colleague, Alan Green, on Gematria type codes that were found in the King James Version of the Bible. And, the people that wrote the Bible were the same people, we believe, that, posed as Shakespeare. And basically, the whole Bible, the King James Version, is literally encoded with encryptions. And a lot of this is so fascinating because what it says to us is almost like what we see on the surface of the world is one paradigm. Unless you actually go into this place of pure intention, which I think is what you did in trying to understand, where you picked out, the Sefer Yetzirah, and you basically said, I want to go for this, the most esoteric text. I want to understand what the mysteries are in this. And that these encryptions that are at the next level down, or the deeper introspection requirement, is actually there so that it can be found. It's not hidden so that it will never be found. It's there so that it can be found by the initiate who is really looking introspectively and wanting to understand the mysteries.
I agree. Couldn't agree more, Robert. And so the bigger context, if we just look at this, it's interesting, but you look at the big context, we're barreling down the path of a cyclic event that drives the kinds of shifts and the paradigm shifts that forever change the world and life in the world. And it's only now that we are within the window of time, and I can say this, within the window of time geologically, when these cycles have occurred in the past. Cosmologically, we're within the window of time. And then we can look socially and politically at the world. We can see that the unsustainable systems are buckling and collapsing. We're moving towards some kind of a new paradigm. My sense is that we don't want that new world based on the hurt and the suffering and the atrocities that we all have seen in our lifetimes in the 20th and now the 21st centuries. And the way to transcend that, I think, and this is, I think, the message of everything we're saying, we are not what we have been told, and we are so much more. We're more, Robert, than we have probably even dared to allow ourselves to think about our own being. And if we embrace not even the whole picture, just embrace a little of that, what that does, it shifts that trajectory away from a future of suffering and war into an uncharted future based upon the way we are learning to think about ourselves. Because all the tech, AI, nuclear weapons, genetic engineering, CRISPR, whatever it is, it's just tech. It's not good, bad, right, or wrong. It's the thinking underlying how it's used. And as we embrace the deep truth of who we are as a society and individuals, that will be reflected in the choices that we make with that technology. That's how you build a new world.
So who do you think we are? I'm interested to hear your feeling on that. What is the extent of our majesty and our capacity and our divinity?
Well, those are
in your feeling.
Yeah, those are three different qualities, and I know we're running close to the close of our time together here. I believe that we, what the evidence suggests, is that we are a hybrid species. And what's fascinating, Robert, when you look at some of these texts that were left out, they describe the creation of the first human by the Elohim. And it wasn't a one-off. They had multiple iterations of failures before they achieved, and here's the key, before they achieved the chemical code that would hold the light of a human soul in the physical body. So we are this hybrid where we have godlike powers that were given to us by a higher intelligence. And for the first time, those powers are imbued into a physicality that allows things that were never allowed before, sensuality in the world and the physicality of the world. And I think we're in uncharted territory in terms of how we embrace those powers in our lives. It's not about leaving the world, not about leaving the earth, but it's about transforming ourselves and transforming the world by embracing the deep truth of who we are. And that's the point of every book that I write and every talk that I give, different facets of it, because it's a big, big story, a big story. And you're doing the same. And I love the way that you come at this from as a mathematician, because those numbers don't lie. I mean, the numbers are the numbers. And in Gematria, when you might have two words that look very different, if they have the same number, it means you're talking about the same thing. Heaven and soul in Hebrew Gematria, two different words, they have the same number. They're talking about the same thing.
Did you know that there's a new love affair with mathematics and geometry happening all around the world today? People who once despised these subjects in high school are now finding they're falling in love with them. Do you know why? Because math without meaning is simply information, whereas math with meaning is divine communication. My courses, The Etymology of Number and The Language of Light, guide you on a journey of self-discovery, sharpening your problem solving and pattern perceiving, as well as analytical and creative thinking, and unlocking your fullest polymathic potential. And most importantly, acquainting you with the mathematical language of the universe itself. You will never see the U inverse the same again. To get started, I recommend The Etymology of Number, a 4-part series that explores the evolution of numbers and their impact on fields like physics, chemistry, music, and art. It is the embodiment of Leonardo da Vinci's encouragement to study the science of art and the art of science. Learn how to see. Realize that everything connects to everything else. My second course series, The Language of Light, is a 6-part series that builds on concepts from the first course and offers deeper insights into unified sciences, ancient wisdom, spirituality, and their relevance to today. My courses are always fun and easy to understand. They intertwine mathematics, music, art, and consciousness, and illuminate the mathematical connections that span all disciplines of science and art. Register for these 2 courses, Etymology of Number and The Language of Light, at robertedwardgrant.com under the Courses tab. And join the Robert Edward Grant community chat on Orion Messenger for lively, engaging, and innovative discourse.
Now, which do you normally use? Hebrew Gematria? Do you use simple Gematria, or do you use Greek? Do you use all of them?
I use all of them. What's interesting in the West, when I'm deriving this message, I'll typically do it from Hebrew because many people are familiar with Kabbalah and things like that. But when I'm in the Middle East, if I'm in Cairo, I can do this in Arabic, and it's the same thing, exactly the same thing in Arabic. Or when I was in the Holy Lands, I would do it both in Hebrew and Arabic, showing that as different as they believe they are from one another, we need look no further than the DNA in every cell of our bodies to say that the message is exactly the same. I've never presented anywhere where I needed to use cuneiform, although it works. And Sanskrit I used to lead groups in the Tibet, 12 monasteries, 2 nunneries over 26 days. And then the Tibetans, when they see this in their language of Sanskrit, it's more meaningful to them because that is the language of their traditions, the original Sanskrit. And it may very well work in other languages. I haven't. Life is
probably does. It probably works in all languages. Somehow consciousness makes it work.
Well, I think it would work in others. I chose these were what are called the root or the core languages that linguists will typically look at, from which other languages are derived. So that was why I looked at those, the 4 root languages. And there are languages that we know that we've used in the past that have been lost. And there's a story about the relationship between those languages and the angles of light coming through a 4-sided pyramid of pure quartz, creating the letters of those languages in the shadows that are cast in the concentric circles around them. So what it says is our languages are derived from the relationship between light and the most stable form that we have, the pyramid in this world, and that there are languages that were probably part of this that have been lost in the past. It may be, we've got 23 languages right now on planet Earth that have been discovered, and we have no idea what they say. They have never been deciphered. AI is helping with some of those. The Indus Valley is one of those, and they're using AI now to try to help decipher that. But 23 languages, what do those languages tell us about our past and our relationship to the world that is meaningful today? There's a lifetime of study for somebody right there.
So is it safe to say that what you started off in saying, that the Gnostic text, it talks about how humanity is basically, we are angels that forgot we were angels, in a way. Does that resonate for you?
Well, in the language of that belief system, that resonates. And if for those who are not biblically or religiously inclined, we go to the historic documents of Mesopotamia, the Akkadian text, Babylonian, Sumerian, all in cuneiform. And what they say is that we are a hybrid alien, if you want to use that term, or Anunnaki blood. And the texts actually say that one of their kind was sacrificed to take their body and mix it with earthly materials to become who we are. We are a hybrid, and that Roland Emmerich in the movie Prometheus, that is what is portrayed in the very first scene, is a being coming to Earth, sacrificing his own body, and he drinks a substance. His body disintegrates, his DNA goes into the water, and we're off to the races. So that's where that came from, that very idea that we are a hybrid of a higher intelligence. I think what's important is not to get hung up in the weeds of the individual story because of the baggage that comes with the stories.
Sure.
If we look at the themes, all of them say that we're not what we've been told, we're more than we've been led to believe, and that we were imbued by a greater intelligence with extraordinary potentials that we are only beginning to understand, that are available to us if we are willing to accept those potentials. And then the language that we wrap around that, and if we're willing to accept the responsibility of living in the way that those potentials allow us. And the language that wraps around that, I think, is where people get stuck.
So I guess the key takeaway I'm taking away from this is that we are more than we are led to believe, for sure.
Yeah.
And that we have a future that is continually evolving, but that we have choices along the way in order to align to that reality or to stick with a reality that's more base and what we've been.
We are at a crossroad where we have to move into a future if we're going to keep this world and the life that we have known in the past. I think there's a bifurcation that's happening in society. There are two parallel societies that are emerging right now. One aspect is all in on all of the tech in the world and in their bodies. Another one is going back to a simpler way of life, going back to the basics, but opening the door to deeper potentials within themselves. Ultimately, I think we'll find a middle ground. I think what we'll find, Robert, is we will accept technology in the world and allow us to develop our own inner technology, our own soft technology of consciousness. And I think the conditions of the world are driving us to do that now sooner than later, rather than just meandering down a road of it happens when it happens. I think in some ways there is a cosmic clock. And it's what I call a sense of graceful urgency. Graceful in the sense that we have the time that we need to accept the truth of who we are and live our lives differently. Urgent in the sense that if we're going to do it, now is the time, because the world is changing. Yeah.
Gregg, thank you so much. What's the name of your book again? If you could show that, pull your book up again.
The title of the book is called Pure Human.
Pure Human.
Yeah, and it is based on the thinking of some of the best minds of our time, that unless we change the trajectory that we're on right now, we are the last generation of pure humans that the world will ever know. By the year 2030, they say that we will be some form of machine-human hybrid. This book gives us the reasons to rethink those choices.
Thankfully, yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Gregg. I'm sure people know where to find you on Instagram, on all the different social media, as well as your television show on Gaia. And it's always great to see you. Thank you for all that you're doing to help push forward, this expansion of consciousness around the globe and help people step into their larger expansion of who we believe we are. And I do believe fundamentally what you just said about being able to accept that we have this potential as well, and to stop thinking of ourselves in smaller terms, I think is critically important, because I think very often we become fearful of realizing our own potential, and we have to let that go to step into it.
We're all in it together. We're learning, and I appreciate you so much. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. Thank you for trusting me with your community, with your audience, Robert, and I look forward to our next.
Absolutely. Look forward to it as well. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon. See you next week on Think Tank. Orion is unique. No algorithms, no propaganda, and no exploitation. Just end-to-end quantum secure data. Messages, groups, and shared media behind a wall of next-generation encryption.